and then more marketing research. Marketing research turned out to be the most fun and stimulating from a professional standpoint regarding applications of statistical methods, some difficult, some not. Okay, but I started the newsletter in 2004, about to have the 13th anniversary next month. It's kind of shocking, but I got 156 issues that have gone out, and it's been a labor of love. It's been a lot of fun, but it's the hat trick letter. It has 2 different publications per month. One's called the Global Money War Report. The other is called the Gold and Currency Report. They do overlap some in function. It's hard to know exactly which report to put a story in. But the Global Money War Report is basically about defense of the dollar, the king dollar, the empire of chaos, the dollar which is being dethroned and defanged, the dollar which is being defended by military, which is one of my one of my forecasts way back in 04 and 05 that earned some of my initial insults. Oh gosh, Jim, how dumb a thing to say, the dollar is going to be defended by military. Yeah, well, that's exactly what the Ukraine and Syria wars are, defense of the dollar, and I can go into details there if you want later. But anyway, it's been a long 13 years. It's been a lot of fun. There was a very big climate change after Lehman in September of 2008, which I gave a 1-month advance warning with details on it, and which I gave a 1-year and 2-year advance warning in general for the subprime bond crisis. So it's all found on www.goldenjackass.com. There's free material in there, free page, main, but the newsletter resides on this website. And, I used to say, Paul, that everything about the interviews was promotional toward the newsletter, but that's really not the case, because there are 2 types of people who I don't say, go on out and sign up for the newsletter. It's people who cannot afford it, who are interested in knowing what's going on. That includes some, older folks, retirees, people on a fixed income, includes students, includes clergy, people working in nonprofit organizations that want to know. So there's a missionary element to this work. But at the same time, sure, it is promotional toward the hat trick letter. My income is derived off the newsletter. So that's a little bit about myself. Got a PhD in statistics. My entire professional career was regarding the practice of that doctorate in statistics. Got a bachelor's degree in computer science. I was a pretty good programmer in my day. And, it's going to sound kind of funny to hear, but programmers who are successful, they tend to be very detail-oriented. They tend to follow algorithms and methods effectively. And I think that there's a lot more care in the analysis with a programming background. And
hey, Jim.
Yeah.
Jim, you remember back in school, you had to wait in line with your punch cards.
You're dating me. Yeah, well, yeah, exactly.
Well, that's what I did. So the point is that every semicolon you forgot meant having to do the whole damn thing over, right? So it made you pay attention to details.
Well, that was me in 1971.
Yeah, there you go.
in I think it was called Bradford Hall at Ohio State University with my Fortran, my 2 Fortran courses, and I took a few more, and then it was more like data structures and comparative programming languages and assembler, macro assembler, and it was a lot of fun. But I realized that's not what I want to do my career in. So I went and diverted towards statistics, a little more math. And it's a long story, but I eventually found my way. And my way was to the graduate program at Carnegie Mellon in probability and statistics, which was, I tell you, one heck of a lot of work, but some of the most exciting and stimulating and gratifying years of my life.
Good. Well, Jim, why don't we cut to the chase now and talk about the kind of red meat that your listeners are so interested in. And that would be kind of the money war. I guess why don't we start with this new Trump administration? It looks to me like they're hostile to the EU and Germany. And I'm wondering if you agree with that or how you see that playing out.
I think there's a very interesting mix of countries they're hostile to, the Trump administration, and other countries they're kind of neutral toward. And I'm having a hard time finding what country the Trump administration is actually friendly toward. I haven't found one. Okay, but you mentioned Germany and the EU. The EU is not a country, it's a union. I'm not trying to contradict you in any way, but the EU is an amalgam of member nations stuck in a fascist state. That's a very important statement to make. Member nations stuck, apparently intractably, within the European Union, which is a fascist state. Here's what I mean by that. The EU commissioners were selected by the elite. I'm thinking by the Rothschilds and their captains. The commissioners operate in Brussels. They run their commission. They have several hundred employees that do not serve the member nations one effing bit. They've got a trade and economics advisor working in Brussels, a woman who openly stated, I do not take orders from the member states. I give them, and we work in the commission here as a separate overarching entity. Okay, it was a very plain statement made over a year ago regarding objections to the Russian sanctions. Notice that almost every single nation in the EU does not want Russian sanctions, yet they're shoved down their throats. Not one nation, for its populist element, favors the Arab influx of refugees, yet the Commission shoves that down their throats also. Okay, so you have the EU Commission operating as kind of a, oh gosh, it's hard to call it anything that we would recognize in the West, but how about if we call it the European Politburo?
Close enough.
Of fascist leaders that they call the commissioners, led by Juncker.
And apparatchiks.
Yeah, apparatchiks. They do not listen at all to the populist voices in the member nation states who one by one are voicing objections to the Arabs coming in and one by one have been for over 2 years objecting to the Russian sanctions. It interrupted the Russian trade with all these countries. Okay, so when Trump came to office, he was on record already as saying he did not like the trends that were in place regarding the EU, the European Union. He did not like the way it operated. He was referring to the Commission, which did not honor any populist or parliament desires from the member nations. He is on record as saying the EU does not serve well the member nations, their economies, nor anything about their nations. Okay, so he favors breaking up the EU. Okay, when you say that he's hostile toward Germany, I think you might be referring, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you might be referring to the fact that he does not like Merkel's administration or coalition and their support for the EU fascist dictators who go by the name of commissioners. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think I heard him call it the EU's a German racket, was the phrase I heard.
Yeah, well, it's hardly a German racket. It's a Brussels elite racket that has nothing German about it.
Yeah, but
what's German about the EU Commission? You tell me.
Well, no, I didn't say the EU Commission, but what's the racket is that you create this one currency, the euro, that makes German exports tremendously increase, but the price is it destroys all these peripheral countries like, Portugal, Spain, and Greece, because the currency is that the EU shouldn't have one currency.
Well, I agree, but that's hardly Germany's fault, and it's hardly Germany's racket. You make it sound very one-sided there, Paul. Are you aware that for the first 10 years of the EU, Germany forked out $2 trillion of its own savings to support the pigs nations of Southern Europe and buy their sovereign debt? $2 trillion? That's not one-sided.
Yeah, and I'm.
How's that a racket?
Well, I thought I was saying what he said, and I do think the euro is a racket, but it's not simply a German racket. The whole thing is a combination of a bunch of bad ideas, and so I would be happy to see the whole thing break apart, to be honest. Well, but I was just asking about him.
Okay, I'm just disagreeing with the terminology of the EU being a German racket. I will agree that there are a lot of elements of the EU which have favored Germany, namely keeping their exports cheap, because after a few years there should have been some adjustments, pardon me, so that the Italian lira and the Spanish peseta would decline with a devaluation, so that the German mark would rise in an upward revaluation and make the German exports more expensive to Southern Europe. But that did not happen because of the euro. That part is a racket for the German exports. But the cost has been extremely heavy for the German nation in the form of what was once $2 trillion in savings. And you're seeing the abuse from the German banks because starting about 4 years ago, and really in accelerated fashion a couple of years ago, the German banks were trying to cash in on their Greek government debt and take some of the prized Greek assets. Okay, that's all part of the backlash from what I believe now is closer to $2.5 trillion that the German savings has funded for the Southern European bankrupt nations. It's really quite pathetic, but let's get back to Trump's attitude toward Germany. I think what I understand is that, apart from any labels and rhetoric that might come out of Trump, he has a basic disgust for the Merkel administration and coalition. It's hard to call it an administration because they operate by a parliament and they fuse together elements to make a coalition. And it's hardly an administration. It's more like the Merkel office with their branch allies for the time being. Okay, Trump doesn't like the German support for the EU and the march like with a goose step by Merkel. Whatever the EU says, Merkel says, oh yeah, right away, whatever you say, we'll get to it. And Trump doesn't like that.
By the way, hey, Jim, who is Merkel? Who do you think brought her to the dance?
She had her rise in the East German side of Germany, which is interesting in its own right. And she had her rise in the German Stasi, which was the equivalent of the East German KGB. So she comes from fascist roots. Now, I think you're indicating a little bit more. Let me go on, Paul, because I'm not going to endorse this thought. I'm going to mention it. There are a lot of reports out there that Angela Merkel, is actually Adolf Hitler's daughter. I think that's what you're driving at.
Well, there's that, or niece, but then there's another thing, and that is her father, was a priest and moved from West Germany to East Germany.
Okay, I'm not familiar with a lot of these things, but I've seen pictures of a woman.
Oh, she looks like him. Yeah, she looks like him. Yeah.
Well, no, let me finish. I've seen pictures of Hitler with a woman who I do not believe was Eva Braun, and with a little girl aged around 8 or 9 or 10, right in there. And the woman looks a lot like the little girl, and the little girl is identified clearly in the picture. This is Angela Merkel as a little girl, shown with Hitler, and I think the woman was her mother, and I think the woman was a friend of Adolf Hitler's and could have been a mistress, could have been, I don't know. But I have a feeling a tremendous joke is being played on the West with a string of Western leaders like Merkel with a Hitler connection, like Jimmy Carter with a Joseph Kennedy connection, like Bill Clinton with a Winthrop Rockefeller connection, and like Obama with a Langley MK Ultra robot connection.
Well, nothing is as it appears. We know that.
Right. But I tell you what, I think Trump wants to see a breakup of the EU. Let me get to the Brexit. Trump has endorsed fully and said, I love the Brexit. I think it's a great move. The EU was not serving Britain. It was not a good mix. It wasn't a good match. It wasn't a good marriage. Now Britain is on its own. I think what he's saying is Britain will now be in a good position to rebuild its economy without the stifling suffocation of the Brussels EU commissioner fascist dictators. So I think he wants to see breakups. I think he would be in favor of the Dutch and French breakups if those happen. I don't think he likes the European Union at all in any related function, nor its dictums. And neither do I.
Hey, we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
And, of course, Britain has a couple of serious advantages. One is they could become like an offshore, low-tax business center. Low regulation, low tax, because the EU is so oppressive. And the other thing is they can try to build up trade relations with the English, the former, colonial world, right, the Commonwealth. Right. They can have a free trade deal with India or something. And none of that is possible if you're in the EU. Everything has to go through the EU bureaucracy.
Not just India, but Canada, Australia, New Zealand.
And yeah, sure, Malaysia, but I mean, lots of powerful, rich countries. And so really, they do have a lot. The only thing is the first few years might be kind of rough because, who knows how that'll play out. But, yeah, well, I have listened to the guy that many think will be Trump's ambassador to the EU, and he was involved in attacking the Soviet Union. And his basic position is, I worked on taking down one, terribly bureaucratic and rotten empire, and I think there's another one out there that needs the same treatment. So it's pretty blunt.
Well, a bigger rotten empire than the EU is the United States.
Well, that's the other angle. Okay. Why don't we move on a little bit?
Sure.
I was listening to you the other day, and you were talking about the Knights Templar and something about Trump, and I don't know. Can you kind of give a little bit more on that, where you think Trump might be getting some support from, or who the Knights Templar are in the modern world or something?
Okay, I have to make an admission here, and I'm pretty honest intellectually about my work.
Okay, good.
One of the nicest compliments I ever got was something I heard very frequently on annual reviews for my positions, my jobs with the 4 employers. in the United States. That was from 1980 to about 2003, and that was, you've got integrity professionally. If you don't know something, you admit it so that errors are not propagated, so bad policy and decisions are not propagated. Okay, here's my admission here, right now toward your answer. I don't know a lot about the Knights Templar. I know some, and I'm trying to learn more, and it can get very complicated, especially when you go back more than a couple hundred years, because there seems to be breaks in the alliance. There seem to be little schisms within it. There seems to be an offshoot. There seems to be constant battles, though, with the Vatican. Okay, so I have been corrected by some very seemingly knowledgeable people who tell me that Trump is not influenced by the Templars, although his background and his family might have been derived from that group. Okay? I am not an expert in this, but here's a little background about the Templars. You know, I'm not going to get this all right, people, so, you know, don't call me down, but I think this is probably 80% correct. About 300 or 400 years ago, Europe was coming out of the Renaissance. Okay, the Renaissance began, and it was all wonderful, and by that it means the Dark Ages were ending, just horrible, horrible conditions were ending. The plague was over. The Inquisition was over. The Pope's brutality was over. And the Vatican emerged as probably the primary political and financial center, although history likes to tell the story that it was neither political nor financial, but only religious, when it was political and financial also. The only political structure that was solid for 1,000 years, 1,200 years in Europe, was the Vatican. And they preserved their power by brutal methods, taxation, and wars. Not much different from what you see in the United States and England. Okay, now, after the Renaissance, there was a break because my understanding is limited here, but the Crusades took place with some Vatican funding, some European staff like soldiers, but also a lot of British soldiers from the monarchies of Britain for hundreds of years. And there was a lot of flack against some of the kings because what he seemed to produce more than anything else was orphans. Orphans without a father who were just running the countryside, robbing wheat fields, granaries, and causing a lot of problems. Kind of like the Arab refugees. Okay, so there was a break, and this is my understanding. The break was that the Templars were largely German and Christian, and the Vatican was largely Western European, Italian, and Satanist. And they had a break. They continued both to do their wars and to do their robbing of gold in the Middle East with the Crusades. And the Vatican tried to rob and steal the Templar gold. And the Templars said, screw you, we're going back to Germany, we're hunkering down, we're going to hide our gold. We don't want to have anything to do with you Vatican Satanists. The Vatican bankers are Satanists. And many of their papal leaders, as in popes, have been sympathetic to the Satanist bankers in the Vatican. And if you're not aware of the Satanist influence in the Vatican, you are so far behind the times, it is pathetic. So the Germans were largely the Christians and the Templars. Think of it as the nobility, but not the dark nobility of the Vatican. Why do they call it the dark nobility, the black nobility? Because they're Satanists. Do a little homework. Look at some of the many families in the black nobility, and you find Satanists all over the place. They're open about it. So the Templars were the Christians. And I think the Templars nowadays are probably teaming up with the Russian Christians, because there was a very important meeting a little over a year ago between Patriarch Kirill from Russian Orthodox Church, who visited the Vatican and visited the fascist Pope Francis Bergoglio. By the way, Pope Francis Bergoglio is guilty of collusion toward the murder of 20,000 young Argentinians in the 1970 and 80 decades, and has not gotten off scot-free, because while he was being investigated for 2 particular murders, he was pulled out of Argentina and made Pope. This is called the fascist Pope, the dirty Pope. I'm hearing that Pope Francis is trying to clean up his past, trying to remedy his past sins, trying to come clean, trying to do some right things, but I don't buy it one effing iota. Okay, if there is a connection between the European elite and Trump, it is with the Templars, and it might be very loose. I think Trump, instead, is much more, I don't like the word tool, but how about a member player of an elite group having to do with the Pentagon and military establishment and Wall Street and the banking establishment. I'm beginning to believe rather firmly, rather convincingly, based on some initial beliefs, based on cabinet appointments, based on some decisions that are coming out now in the last 2 months of his new administration, that Trump is a member player of the military and banking elite within the United States. And I don't regard that as an extreme compliment. I'm not saying that that is a complete indictment either, because there's a group within the Pentagon, we've been calling them the White Hats, and the White Hats had a large body coming from a group they called America First. And if you listen to the, not acceptance, what do you call it, inauguration speech for Trump back in January on the 17th, he mentioned America First about 5 or 7 times. America First is not just a silly little catchphrase slogan. America First is the name of the group organized by over 500 dismissed and fired generals and admirals from the Pentagon by Clinton, Bush II, and Obama, who I regard to be the neocon narcotics presidents. So, it looks to me like Trump got a lot of favorable support from the good guys in the Pentagon, but unfortunately, the good guys in the Pentagon want to increase the Pentagon budget at the expense of the education budget and a few other departments in the U.S. government. But let me say this. I don't find that the education department for the U.S. government has done a damn thing in 30 years. So cutting their budget might be a good thing. He's getting some flack for that, though. He's also cut back on some other things. And I've yet to see word one for the great infrastructure projects. I'm talking about actual contracts. Word one for an actual contract. Now, I give Trump some credit. He's trying some innovative methods. And I think they're, very, very large trial balloons. But I think he's trying to pursue some Japanese pension money. pension funds. Now, they've got well over $1 trillion in Japanese government pension funds. And it's already been declared illegal to use any of that on U.S. projects on U.S. soil. But he's trying to do something. It could be something clever like calling home foreign, like Japanese, Forex bonds, Forex reserves in the form of U.S. Treasury bonds, calling them home, putting them into the United States in the form of infrastructure projects, maybe not initially a commitment of $1 trillion, but maybe a few years consecutively of between $100 and $200 billion, because that would offset the negative side in the, what do they call it, current accounts deficit. And the current account deficit is made of two parts. The goods and services trade deficit, and the other one is the investment deficit, like how many more bonds, whether they're treasury bonds or corporate bonds or municipal bonds, do foreigners buy, in addition to property, like hotels and homes in Florida or whatever, commercial buildings in New York or Dallas, doesn't matter. Okay, so add together the trade deficit and the investment deficit, you get the current account deficit. Well, if Trump brings in $100 or $200 billion a year to offset the 500 plus billion in trade deficit, that will be a brilliant stroke, and that, I think, is what Trump is trying to do. But back to your original question, I think the connection with the Knights Templar, which at one time had a very serious core in Germany in opposition to the Satanists in the Vatican, I think it's probably very loose, and his real support is with the Wall Street bankers and the military-industrial complex. And I don't like either of them, but I will say that there are a lot of good Pentagon players. There are a lot of really good, loyal American generals and admirals who want to do the right thing for the country, who want to defend the people and not exploit them and not send them to foreign wars where they come back without arms or legs. But this is getting very nasty, Paul.
We'll just have to see, you know. A lot of people may be ending up in prison soon or worse. Hey, Jim, as an aside, in the last couple of weeks, Trump has given a couple of speeches. One, he went to Andrew Jackson's house for the 250th anniversary of his birth and, you know, gave a speech about Jackson. And you know all that implies.
Yes.
The man who destroyed the bank. And then he, in Kentucky, gave a speech. And I just thought, after a few minutes of it, I thought, man, this is a dead man talking. He talked about Henry Clay and the American system, or the national system of political economy, which is, you know, a national bank, cheap infrastructure, long-term loans, and a tariff. And other countries have emulated that, all of them quite successfully. It's, you know, it's the American system. But, I mean, it's a declaration of war against the current system. We have the Federal Reserve. We have so-called free trade. You know what I mean? I was just astounded. I doubt that he wrote it. I think his guy, Stephen Miller, wrote it. But nonetheless, there's a lot going on, and we just don't know where it's going to go at this point. I mean, anything could happen tomorrow. Why don't we move on?
No. Can I comment on this?
Sure.
Okay, because you opened up a very big room, and there's a lot going on in that room, and I have some comments. Rather than move on. Okay. When he laid a wreath and paid his respects to Andrew Jackson, who's on the $20 bill, which is the only bill that Obama mentioned as having a replacement for the face. Obama. She mentioned, Obama is more feminine than we know. Because Barack served as the lipstick what do you call it, submissive member of that gay
Of the
duo.
couple, yeah. Okay,
Yes,
okay.
sir. Okay. All right, so when Trump paid respects to Jackson, what he was doing was thumbing his nose at the Fed.
Of course.
Okay. Now, when I said that he's a member player of Wall Street, that does not necessarily mean it's 100% bad description. It's not necessarily an indictment, because Trump has about 3 or 4 members within his financial group of advisors who are gold advocates, led by his economic advisor, Judy Shelton. Okay? So what I am wondering about, and you know, we don't get to just dial up or download and learn about these things. We have to make inferences. We have to look at the evidence and look at the direction and make some conclusion and test our hypotheses like a statistician would do. And that's exactly what I'm doing. Because we have to try to figure out whether Trump has made some kind of a deal with the Goldman Sachs devil, whereby he will have a period of time, like, say, 2 years, or like, say, his first term, where Goldman Sachs will continue the dollar fraud, will continue the king dollar corruption, and will enable dollar-based credit in order to build this infrastructure and what I call reindustrialize the United States, for which I have seen zero progress in 2 months. The United States not only needs infrastructure, like bridges and port facilities and highways and toll roads and railways. We don't have a single excellent high-speed railway in the United States. It's an absolute joke. Anyone who comes back from China comes back with bug eyes about how unbelievably advanced China is on their mass transportation. I got a personal friend who went there last year and came back. Unbelievable stories he tells. But Trump has made zero progress in, say, making 20 to 30,000 new companies in the United States, which would relieve our export problem. We outsourced the bulk of our industry and have earned a $550 billion trade deficit annually that I think this year will be closer to $600 billion and has crippled our nation. Okay, I haven't seen any progress toward
but Jim,
reindustrializing. Okay, so Trump
but
also
that can't be done.
What do you mean it can't be done?
The president can't do that without, like, a certain amount of influence in Congress. I mean, or
exactly.
So let me tell you my disappointment. Okay, you said that nothing's happened, or you know, relatively little has happened in Trump's time. To me, I'm going to say my disappointment. I thought that whoever backed Trump, whoever they would be, let's say the White Hats in the Pentagon or whoever, they have not done what was necessary. They had to take out at least a certain number of the leadership in the Congress to put the fear of God in the remaining ones. And so whether that be through pizza scandals or whether it be through, you know, undeclared Clinton Foundation frauds with Russia or Saudi Arabia or whatever, they had to get rid of some people like McCain or Schumer or Ryan, because those guys they're not going to change. Right. They're swamp creatures. I mean, you're not going to get a snake like Ryan or a turtle like McConnell or whatever, an alligator like Schumer to change.
Yeah, I agree, but look to see what Trump did to sabotage Ryan. Ryan went out and took Obamacare, made a few adjustments. It's being called Obamacare Light. And Obama said, I'm sorry, and then Trump said to Ryan, go ahead, get that through Congress. And I think he really sent him off the plank on a ship with his hands tied behind his back. Because now it failed in the Congress. Trump is probably smiling, and there's talk now of replacing Ryan with his what is it, majority speaker of the House, majority leader of the House, majority leader. Yeah.
Okay,
so but
while
look
we're
to
on
see
this,
look to see Ryan replaced.
I hope so. But while we're on this topic,
look
reindustrialization.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, look to see Schumer in a lot of trouble real soon over the pet. I don't like to call it Pizzagate. I like to call it the pedophile sex rings and child sacrifice murder ring, because that's what it is.
Of course. Okay. Well, the next thing is you brought up the topic of reindustrialization, and that's one of my questions for you. Who do you think is actually on board with that? Do you think China can live with that? Do you think I mean, look, what's been going on is unsustainable. The U.S. simply can't have these trade deficits. And, I mean, we're going to run out of things to continue to deindustrialize and outsource. You know what I mean? We're going to have to outsource ourselves. You know what I mean? I mean, it's ridiculous. So where do you see things going on that front?
Okay. If you just go without military aspect, just nothing on the military front at all, Trump's going to make an enemy with China. I've got he's not a client, but he's a contact in China, and he introduced himself through my Contact Us window of the Golden Jackass site. And he is owner of let's just say, a successful manufacturing business in not East China, in West China, okay, nearer the Indian border, as opposed to near the Pacific coast. And he's telling me that there is a vast outflow of the American and Western companies that had set up shop in China following 2000, the year 2000, 2001, most favored nation status, all that. They're all packing up and leaving. He said it's over 90% of them. They're leaving. And they're wondering where to go because business conditions in the United States are still not favorable. By that I mean the tax rate is the worst in all 20 industrialized nations in the West. The United States is horrendous in tax rates, and at the same time, they're pretty bad about environmental protection influence, and they're pretty bad about OSHA and worker safety, and they're pretty bad about everything.
Obamacare.
Obamacare, yes, it's all of it. So they're wondering where to go. Now, if Trump wants to call home a lot of industry, well, that's fine, but he can't do it without them becoming well-rooted in a system. And it requires better tax structure and lower federal regulations. I mean, most Americans couldn't even tell you what the federal tax rate is. They have no idea. They don't even know what a global reserve currency means. So it's really quite sad. The hat-trick letter is intended to educate people on what the global currency reserve status means, as in global banking reserves in the form of treasury bonds and trade payments, like for oil or container vessels or whatever, including international consulting contract, trade done in dollars or credit done in treasury bills, the shorter term instruments. Okay, Trump needs to bring home a lot of industry. And he pretty much laid out the map saying, we can't do that with our high tax rate. We can't do that with a more adequate and updated infrastructure system. What he's saying is the supply chain just couldn't work with our trucking system and our 80-year-old rail system. It just wouldn't work. Okay, so let's see what he can do on that. And I'd like to see him have a goal of starting simultaneously $200 billion a year in infrastructure projects and 25,000 new companies a year with the purpose, a stated objective from the start, of exporting a third of the output in order to relieve the trade deficit. I forgot to mention, I didn't squeeze it in my little time here, Trump wants to eliminate the Federal Reserve. This might get, I thought that's what you were going to allude to, Paul, when you said this is a dead man talking.
Well, I will let you go into that.
Well, okay, we haven't really seen much movement in this direction by Trump. But what I'm hearing is that there are a couple of Fed board appointments coming up because some retirements are in line. And I don't know whether these are retirements due to older age or retirements from the FOMC, the Federal Reserve Board, whether they were just retirements of people who are fed up with the status quo and looking to get some reform, because there are a number of critics on the Fed. There are two or three. It's not just Fisher. There are two or three who constantly mention things that are ugly and just dysfunctional. They don't work. Okay. But I think we might move toward, and this could come later in the term, the first term for Trump, if he's still around. I mean, by that I mean still among the living and also still not resigned and still not impeached and out of office, because there's a lot of weird stuff going on with the country. We fabricated the Russian enemy using the Mossad and Langley and narcotics money to create the coup in Kiev, Ukraine. We fabricated the Russian enemy. Now, anybody who talks with the fabricated Russian enemy is supposedly a traitor, but that's in the definition of the neocons, who I believe have 70% or more control of the Congress. You know, you move forward from 1992 with the first neocon president. Clinton was not called a neocon. Clinton was part of the Langley narcotics connection. The Mina Air Force Base movement of cocaine to Panama lined up with Noriega, and that relation went sour. That's all narcotic stuff from the neocon wing within the U.S. government that came out. I mean, you had Bush 2 come out and say, yeah, we're neoconservatives. That sounds better than neo-Nazis. That sounds better than we're passing out brown shirts because we're the new fascists. Americans wouldn't have voted for that because they just, even though they don't know what fascism is by and large, I'm making a claim that most Americans do not know what fascism is. That's my claim. I base that on conversations with my own brother, who has a Phi Beta Kappa degree in a university in political science. So they don't teach what fascism is, except regarding Mussolini and Franco from 75 years ago. Okay. We now have the fascists running the U.S. government. They cut across both the Democrat and the Republican lines, even though Bush 2 had the coming out party with the wing, the extreme wing of the conservatives in the Republican Party. Take a close look, people. You see some of the same people running who ran the Obama State Department, who were neocons in the Bush 2 administration. Did you miss that?
No. Hey, Jim, a quick, if you don't mind, I want to go back to one thing. Talking about the Federal Reserve or weakening it or attacking it, couldn't the funding for infrastructure spending be done in a way like, you know, whatever, Treasury notes or something? Couldn't it be done in a way that cuts out the Fed?
Well, it could, but it would add the new debt. And who's going to create the debt, or who is going to fund the debt? By that I mean, will it be just printed more money from the Fed, put aside into, say, special Treasury construction bonds, another $1 trillion? Or would it be, say, Japanese pension money, or perhaps maybe a large slice of the $1 trillion from China? Because both China and Japan have $1 trillion in their Forex central bank reserves. Apart from that, Japan has $1 trillion in their government pension fund. The Japanese are the rich ones in that group, not the Chinese. The Japanese are ridiculously wealthy. They've got like $20 trillion in savings in their country, loaded up in their pension system, private corporate pension system, like Toyota. Okay, so here's where I think it might get really interesting. they might, okay, to answer your question, they might come up with some special Treasury construction bonds, and the Fed would eat them, okay? The Fed doesn't buy anything. The Fed prints money and reassigns ownership rights to what was created out of thin air. Very big distinction there. But we might see something weird happen, like the Fed being asked, because Trump does not control the Fed. The Fed might be asked to pitch in $100 billion a year from its Treasury bonds and to use them as currency for contractors to start the infrastructure projects. So you could have free money creation in Treasury construction bonds, actual money coming to the U.S. from foreign reserves or pensions, or maybe the Fed spending some of its money. Now, you do that, you're going to start to see rising interest rates. That's the rub. That's the rub. That's the downside. And Trump might say that's a good thing because we've got artificially low interest rates. And the economy, without a voice, will say, uh-oh, we just got a big hairball. And you're going to see a massive crush of, say, mortgage bonds, car loan bonds, and student loans, and then the fracture of the banks. So there's no way out of this. Here's one of the worst aspects and consequences of having a $500+ billion annual trade deficit. If you move toward really good, proper, responsible monetary reform, and you bring about a gold-backed dollar, in the first year, if the price of gold is still $1,300 an ounce, in the first year, that $550 billion of trade deficit becomes 13,000 tons of gold. Now, let's just suppose Trump manages to double the gold price. I'm trying to get some simple back-of-the-napkin math here. Double the gold price to, say, $2,500, $2,600. That would mean that the first year of the trade deficit, if it's still around the neighborhood of $500 billion, that would result in a loss of 6,500 tons of gold. No country on earth is going to want to lease to the United States anywhere near 10,000 tons of gold when they're going to lose all of it at the current price and 2/3 of it at a doubled gold price. So we're locked in with this corrupt, fraudulent fiat currency dollar. We're locked into it until we have greater industry, we bring back what we outsourced, and we have a hell of a lot more exports, because $500 billion will not be fixed in 4 years of the first Trump term. If they're lucky, they can get it cut down to $300 billion in 4 years, if they're lucky. Good luck with that.
So you've talked about a Scheisse dollar in the future. And I'm curious if you think there'll be a Scheisse euro, but where do you see currencies going in the next, let's say, year or so?
Oh, I think the currencies are going to endure an assault from the side flanks. Here's what I mean by that. I gave you all kinds of reasons why the fiat currencies are going to continue led by the dollar. The dollar cannot be replaced by a legitimate currency, because whatever gets replaced by it would result in different kinds of crises, like losing its entire backbone, like gold-backed, or oil reserves backing a dollar. I did a calculation, Paul, of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and it sounds like a really nice, huge oil reserve that we have. But I did a calculation based on a nice, flat, again, napkin-type calculation of $50 oil, and it came out to about $70 billion for that petroleum reserve. That's nothing. No, I'm sorry, 7. I'm sorry. Oh gosh, I have to correct myself. $7 billion. That was the strategic oil reserve. Because I remember this number. We had 70 units to make up our trade deficit. 70 times the strategic petroleum reserve. It was 7 billion multiplied by 70 to get 490. No, roughly 500. The petroleum reserve is a drop in the bucket. We could not sell, say, $100 billion of commercial property to the owners of our trade deficit comfortably in a single year. We're locked in this currency. So I think the flank is going to be important. And here's what the flank might look like real soon. Because something happened following the Ukraine war way back in the spring of 2014. We're now 3 years along into this horrendous war, which, by the way, has a human organ black market element to it. Because if you do any homework, you'll learn that 2,000 cadavers, dead bodies, human bodies, are littering the forests outside of Kiev. And they have one characteristic. They're not just all dead, they're missing their organs. Okay. Who's the chief suspect in black market human organ transactions? It's Israel. Israel. Okay, so I'm thinking, yeah, fits like a glove. Okay, now, when you had the Ukraine war outbreak, you also had Russia and China signing what they called a Holy Grail energy deal, whereby China would pitch in some of their reserves of currency reserves, and help to fund gigantic extensions of the Russian pipelines to deliver oil to China and some gas, but mostly oil. Later, in the second chapter to that, they talked about gas lines that would move toward the Sea of Okhotsk on the Pacific coast of Russia to make LNG facilities. And that would service not only China, but Japan. Japan is very interested in the Russian LNG facility. Okay, the point is that Russia and China moved toward their energy contracts and an infrastructure pipeline system to be funded by U.S. Treasury bonds. And what would China use in future years to pay for the Russian oil? It would either be Treasury bonds or RMB currency. So far, the Chinese are using RMB currency, which the Russians are taking directly to Shanghai, using the gold futures contract based in RMB currency, and cashing out gold bullion. So the Russian-Chinese oil trade right now is pretty much centered upon RMB payments converted to gold. Okay? That's the end around. Why are those two countries so important? Because China is the number one importer of oil, and Russia is the number one producer of oil in the world, in this earth. I like saying global because, when you say world, you got to include Mars and the moon, because we do have some projects. We do have some projects there. I don't want to get into that. Okay, so if the biggest commercial trade, namely oil, is done by the biggest importer and the biggest producer, not in dollar, then you can pretty well assume that the petrodollar is dead. And it's just wiggling around and flailing with some puppeteer movements in the Gulf monarchies run by the Arab states. Okay, this is the end around. I think we're going to see soon an RMB contract in Shanghai for petroleum. And that way the Russians can do their forward purchases with China doing the buying, with these contracts. And they might also continue to use the RMB in cash payment, which is then converted to gold. What I'm driving at is we're getting very close to an RMB payment system for oil. And I believe that in this recent conference with the Saudis in China that took place 1 and 2 weeks ago, I believe part of the agenda there was to discuss payment for Saudi oil by China in RMB. And maybe they're going to be moving forward with this Shanghai exchange and the oil contract denominated in RMB, the Chinese currency. So we're getting very close toward a gold trade note for oil payments. Okay. What's the future of the dollar and the euro? I don't know, but I believe it'll be somewhat marginalized by this competition. It's not going to be a frontal assault where the Chinese say, we now have a gold-backed RMB, and the Russians say, we have a gold-backed ruble, and the Germans say, we have a new gold-backed Nordic euro, and the Arabs say, we have a new gold-backed dinar that Gaddafi was killed for. That's why Gaddafi was killed. The gold-backed Arab dinar. It was well along. Never in the news. But who writes the news? Those who killed him.
Of course.
Now, if the EU gets broken up, Paul, this is different now. Different theme along the same question. If the EU is broken up by Italy or France, if any one country drops the euro currency, the euro must be redefined because it's all locked in together. Think of it as a floating raft, and many of the bamboo poles are tied together, and those poles are the old European Union currencies, like the lira, the francs, the peseta, the drachma from Greece. Okay, take out any one, and the whole raft is unraveled. I just learned that recently. I had a client say, I'm very familiar with the actual formation of the euro. If you take out any one, you must have all the contracts rewritten. Because payment in a euro involves divvying it out to all the different bamboo poles on the raft. So if you take out one pole, you take out the whole raft. You take out the drachma from Greece or the lira from Italy or the franc from France, and you ruin the whole raft. You have to rewrite the whole contract. That is probably how the European Union is going to die. And I sure hope it happens fast, because they've got thousands of Arabs coming in every week, and they're immune from prosecution. So I think we're going to see a gold trade note. We're going to see a RMB-backed system for oil payment. I mean, can you imagine the chaos in Washington and Wall Street if the Saudis announce, yeah, we're still friends with the United States, we're still buying their military hardware for our vicious Yemen war, but we're going to sell China oil in RMB. We're going to go on a dual system and sell Europe oil in dollars, but sell Asia oil in RMB. I think you might then see quickly Japan and Korea and the Pacific Rim also pay for Saudi oil in RMB. And then if the United States doesn't hurry up and kill some people, you're going to see all the Gulf region nations selling Asia oil and taking payments in RMB. So the United States, I think, will continue to threaten the Saudis until the Saudis decide, we don't care about your threats anymore because our kingdom is going down the chute, going down the tubes. It's going to shit. And that's exactly what I think is happening to Saudi Arabia. It's going to hell in a handbasket.
Okay, Jim. Jim, we're getting into my last question for today, and that is, what do you think is going on in the Middle East? Trump now is sending more people in, and it looks like we're backing the Saudis in Yemen more. looks like we're trying to partition Syria now by creating a Kurdish zone. What do you see going on, and what do you think it means?
I don't have enough time to answer that question, honestly. This is, I think, the end of the color revolutions that Obama started. Not a single one was successful from its stated goals. The United States lost Egypt as an ally. Pardon me. They lost Egypt. They're now firmly in the Russian camp. We're about to lose Libya as, it's hardly say an ally, but the ragtag warlords that had been following the U.S. lead and accepting some of the free shipments of arms, they're now scattered, and the Russian-backed element in Libya is moving in toward control. So the warlord political model is at work in Libya. We lost Egypt. I don't believe at all that the U.S. is firmly behind the Saudis in Yemen. I think it's more like the mercenaries paid by U.S. narcotics money from the Bush family, the Bush and Clinton Narcotics Organization. I think they're funding some of the mercenaries in Yemen, and I'm hearing it's more and more the Sudanese who are being paid as the mercenaries. I expect the Saudis to lose that war. Okay. I don't think the U.S. influence in Yemen is going to amount to jack shit because we're not going to put in thousands of U.S. soldiers with boots on the ground. You're seeing numerous stories of the Yemen factions. I don't even know what to call them. I'm just going to call them factions. This is not a sectarian Muslim battle, people. This is the Saudis trying to steal the Yemen oil and gas reserves with the help of the United States, the help of the U.S. drug money, not the Pentagon regulars. This is the mercenaries from the Bush and Clinton drug money that gathers in $1 trillion of profit a year. Okay, we're seeing numerous stories now of Yemen nationals sending missiles to smack Saudi Arabia, either for their war outposts or military outposts to destroy an entire depot, or to hit some cities. They're starting to hit some cities, and I don't like this. Hitting a depot is one thing; that's a military target. Hitting a city will kill, maybe 100 or more civilians who are not part of this battle. Okay, now in Syria, it's very, very different. I think Trump is doing something. I didn't explain this about Trump before, but Trump, in my opinion, is the first president in a very big way for important posts in his cabinet to have shadow posts, shadow positions. Here's what I mean by that. In both the intelligence arena and the security arena, which are, linked at the hip. The cabinet posts, I believe, are being filled officially, keyword officially, by people who are considered friendly and favorable by the neocons in the Congress. And therefore the Senate gives them an approval. And Trump and his real cabinet members, the ones who make the decisions, who don't have the official title, all laugh behind the closed room doors. Because the shadow posts are not put before Congress for approval, nor are their policies put before the Congress for discussion. The shadow government might include at least 3 members, like Defense Secretary and like National Security Advisor. I'm wondering if a shadow post is there for the Treasury Secretary, so that Mnuchin, who's the official cabinet leader there for Treasury, he goes before Congress and he tells them what they want to hear. But the decisions behind the scene, like, for instance, combating the Fed, forcing an audit, replacing some board members, maybe pressuring them to spend some of their $4 trillion in treasury bonds on infrastructure. Okay, that might have pressure coming from the shadow post. So I don't know how many shadow posts there are. The wonderful thing about a shadow system in the cabinet is you don't know who they are, you don't know where they sit, and you don't know what their policies are. But I'll tell you one member, and that was the guy dismissed from the National Security Advisor position, Flynn. Now, there are a lot of stories going out there that he wanted to pressure the what do you call it, rescission. Let's just cancel the Iran nuclear deal, or at least publicize some of the elements of the deal that were really, really scummy. And I just have a suspicion that Obama put in the Iran nuclear deal a little provision in there, maybe for sharing narcotics produced in Afghanistan under the U.S. military and Langley aegis. It's Langley running the chemical processing and the Pentagon Army soldiers protecting the fields and protecting the shipments. You know, the escorts for a tanker truck of chemicals to make heroin. That's what I'm referring to, vertical integration. Okay, I believe there might have been some kind of a deal in there to share either heroin product with Iran or heroin profits from sales with Iran, or an agreement to stop the flood of heroin from their Afghan border, which has been going on for 15 years, courtesy of the United States, flooding the northern region of Iran with heroin to give them a societal problem, health problem, kind of like the United States, where heroin is now, in some areas, as cheap as marijuana. Okay, so this shadow government is occupied by one member that I can identify, and that is Flynn. Remember, McMaster's, the new defense secretary, went before the Congress and pretty much laid out all the different neocon themes about Russia is really nasty, we don't like them, they're a scourge to Europe and a real threat for our way of life. Okay, all that nonsense. They told them what they wanted to hear. What's Flynn's new position? He's no longer an NSA, National Security Advisor. Okay, his position is the Office of Strategic Intelligence. I got this from Cato, my military source. He's got 20-some years of experience with military and security contacts inside the U.S. government. I asked him, what is this OSI role that Flynn has? And he said, well, it's kind of simple. There are 13,000 different private security organizations operating legally inside the United States. And the Office of Strategic Intelligence has, what do you call it, overview. Overview for their functions to see that they're doing their jobs properly. They're not, say, tied in with foreign terrorist elements or my joke is, foreign heroin producers that are in competition with the Langley people that we know and love, who are keeping our country safe and protecting our freedom. Okay, so Flynn is now in charge of 13,000. Let me give you an example of a couple types of security organizations. There might be a contracted group that say, protects some of the vaccine makers in big pharma. Most of them are headquartered in New Jersey. So they might have, little side projects of murdering doctors who discover what's in vaccine. Okay, that might be some of the people who are hired as security agents for, say, big pharma. Big banks like J.P. Morgan, they probably have a security group that guards, say, shipments of gold, shipments of bonds, shipments of heroin. Because heroin packets are used in J.P. Morgan in overnight deposits, side by side with gold bars and treasury bonds. Okay, what now is Flynn's assignment with these 13,000? Okay, there are lots and lots of other security organizations that just guard, say, Home Depot's inventory and their distribution networks. A very legal function. There are lots and lots, I think probably 90% or more, 95% of the security organizations operating in the United States among those 13,000 are doing very legal work. So what is Flynn's mission? He has been told to hire some of these organizations that do security to follow the NGO groups who are hiring Americans to do demonstrations against Trump and to prove that their funding is coming from Obama and Soros and to put them out of work. And maybe charge them with sedition, and if they're doing some really nasty stuff, charge them with treason. But to isolate the Soros funding, where Obama was for a time the chief of all the NGOs managing the demonstrations / riots in the United States against Trump. And I'm really wondering if Obama is in Tahiti, staying at the Gay Man Hotel. I'm wondering about that. And I'm wondering what was his motive for going there, if indeed he is there. And I'm wondering if that big 4.2-ton cocaine bust near Saint Croix, we call it Saint Cruz. In Spanish it's Santa Cruz, French it's Santa Cruz, Saint Cruz, Saint Cross. The Caribbean bust might have involved Obama, might have involved Obama's best friends. I have a sneaky suspicion that was not just a party vessel for having fun and having his gay friends on for sex parties.
Jim, are you talking about the Lady Michelle incident?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I'm glad you brought that up and not me. Thank you for bringing that up. I did not forget the name. I wanted someone else to bring it up. Can't get confirmation, but the stories are out there. There are about 5 from various alternative web news lines, and they all say the same information, same location, same TSA agents. That's Transportation Safety Administration or Transportation Security Administration. They also mentioned the bust in Los Angeles with the TSA agents. I think that was their connection. They also mentioned a ship with 4.2 tons of cocaine. They all mentioned the same thing, the largest bust in almost 20 years in the U.S. They also mentioned that it was registered to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which is a Queen of England private island and not even a country. It also mentioned the construction of the airport, which cannot be justified by tourism. It's for movement of cocaine. So Trump might have busted the biggest Obama element to the Langley narcotics influx into the United States. And now it appears, very hard to confirm, that Obama has now gone into hiding where Tahiti does not have any extradition. But they do have gay hotels. And notice that Obama's wife, Michael, born Michael LaVaughn Robinson, the son of a woman who is a crack whore in Chicago, the son of a little Chicago mayor office machine, some guy named Robinson. Okay, notice that Michael is not, and I'm only going by what Obama called her in 4 separate events at the White House and in front of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Michael and I are very grateful for the hospitality you've all given us during this trip. In the White House Rose Garden, Michael and I are exhausted from the trip. We thank everybody in the press corps. Michael and I, we've seen the pictures where Mike's package is very visible with a nice breeze on stage and the wrong choice of a light dress, Michael. Okay, Michael, Oregon State University middle linebacker in the late 70s or late 80s. Michael, okay, notice Michael is not with Obama because Michael served his role. Notice that the kids are no longer with Michael or with Barack Obama. They served their role. They're back with their parents in Morocco. We've been played, people. I've known about Michael and his arranged family ever since his second year of office.
Well, Jim, we're played all the time on every front.
Yeah, well, it didn't take long to figure out Clinton was the bastard son of Winthrop Rockefeller. Take a look at their faces side by side. Take a look at the age difference. Winthrop Rockefeller, governor of Arkansas in the 70 decade. Okay, how old was he then? Oh, I don't know, about 45, 50. Okay, fine. Had a little boy named William Jefferson. They decided to call him Clinton for some odd reason. I guess that's the mother's last name. And notice that the father of Bill Clinton was never mentioned in any campaign run. Where'd you come from, Bill? Well, my mother and I... Okay. Where's your father? That's a question not permitted to ask. Jimmy Carter. Who's your father? We know Miss Lillian's your mother. Who's your father? Oh, well, do a little research and you learn that Lillian was secretary for Joseph Kennedy, Sr. Put their faces side by side and you see those enormous set of teeth for Jimmy Carter and Joe Kennedy. Put Robert Kennedy, Joe Kennedy Sr., and Jimmy Carter side by side and they all look alike.
It's an amazing world, Jim. It's an amazing world.
We have been played, and I'm wondering, who's Donald Trump?
Well, I read that his uncle was a professor at MIT and was involved with the FBI in, dealing with Tesla's papers after Tesla died. And
after all the Tesla papers were stolen, you mean?
Well, I don't know, but...
after Tesla's laboratory was blown up by J.P. Morgan?
Well, I'm talking about after his death.
Yeah, I know. I'm talking about during his life. I think the papers were stolen by J.P. Morgan. His laboratory was blown up, and later Trump's father got his hands on some of the documents. And, okay, so who's Trump? I don't know.
Well, what I'm saying is he seems to, you mentioned the military, but he also seems to have close relations with some element of the FBI or police or whatever, and so that's another question. But
well, let me give you my little theory on how that links with the current administration. Trump had to survive in some pretty nasty arenas in the casino business. Anyone who knows Atlantic City knows that it's really ugly. So's Vegas. Vegas is infiltrated by the mafia.
What do you mean infiltrated? They started it along with the Mormons.
Well, okay, you could say they started it, but I think Mo Green might disagree with you. It was started by an element within the U.S. elite that does not eat pork and goes to temple on Saturday night. And then the mob with the Corleones. They infiltrated, as I said. But now it's pretty much a mob-run city, along with Atlantic City. My point is that Trump had to survive in a nasty arena. And my guess is that he's got some mob connections. And my guess is those mob connections are tied in with the FBI.
Makes perfect sense.
So we're going to find out who he is, and he had to survive some threats to his personal safety. I mean, threats to his life. He had to survive.
Sure.
And I think he did so with his connections to the mob, and I'm told that there are at least 2 people in cement structures holding up buildings in Atlantic City who threatened Trump. At least 2. I don't know who they are. I don't care who they are. My point is that he has some powerful friends, and I think that's part of the Pentagon white hat and the FBI white hat and maybe some positive element from Wall Street that wants to put the United States on a proper positive footing so that the U.S. can continue another 20 years and so that Wall Street can continue to exploit it. One of the funniest things you could ever want to hear is boardroom meetings of the mafia, where they say, we want the U.S. economy to remain strong so we can continue to be a parasite on it.
Hey, that's my kind of elitist.
Yeah.
Because they're all rotten. So at least I want somebody who wants all of us to have enough blood so that we can stay alive.
Well, you know, the big vampire squid in Goldman Sachs does not want the U.S. economy to go to hell. They do not want the U.S. Union to break up into 6 territories. They do not want our economy to falter in a gigantic way. They want people to continue to have money so they can put them into fraudulent mortgage bonds. For the income stream, the secure stream comes from 3 different, one particular item in the secure stream can go into 3 different bonds, where they can have the MERS database, the Mortgage Electronic Registry System or something like that, MERS. That is where the title fraud was done. And so people were killed to keep them all quiet. Keep that whole thing quiet. Part of the gigantic mortgage bond fraud that really has not been cleaned up. I mean, you got $230 billion in penalties and fines for various large banks in the United States related to mortgage bond investor fraud and mortgage bond issuance fraud. And that's just the tip. Unless it gets to, say, $2 trillion in fines and penalties, you haven't touched it. $200 billion? That's nothing. That's 10% of the fraud. J.P. Morgan sold twice as many U.S. Treasury bonds as the government issued. Where's the prosecution for that? You're not going to find data for it because that was in Building 7, and that's why it came down, Building 7 of the World Trade Center. Came down as sympathy for the others. That's the architectural justification that the moron public is asked to swallow, and I'm not part of that moron public. Oh, these are exciting times. If you know, one of the advantages I have, I'm going to say this as a closing item, Paul. One of the advantages I have with the hat-trick letter, and I'm not, necessarily ashamed of this, because it was part of the culture back then of the hippie and the wildflower generation. I sold marijuana. I was a drug dealer my senior year of college. And the summer afterwards, a little more intensely. I bought myself a 1971 BMW 2002. I paid $2,500 for it before the American public knew what BMW was. I just had some motorcycle buddies, not crazy types, but one guy from Cleveland, he was a nice guy, Steve, I won't say his name, but he had a nice chopper, and he took me around the campus at, 50 miles an hour. It scared the crap out of me. I said, hey, thanks, Steve, I'm not doing that again. And we weren't even high. But my advantage, Paul, is I followed that experience of mine where we almost got caught by a couple of narcs. Sale of a pound of marijuana to somebody working in close association with the police in the state of Ohio. We almost got caught, but we gathered all our stuff, put it in the closet of a friend, and took a 4-day vacation with a friend who had a swimming pool in his apartment complex. So we lay low. My advantage is I can think a bit like a criminal, and I saw all the Godfathers movies. I saw them. The last one with the Vatican involvement, that was silly. That was a moneymaker. But Godfather 1 and 2, they were excellent movies. I learned a lot. I learned how the mob operates, and that is exactly how most offices of the U.S. government operate. That is exactly how Wall Street banks operate. So I got a leg up because many of my forecasts involve the integration of the fraudulent element and how it is proceeding and evolving. That's why in 2011 I made an outrageous, outlandish, unusual forecast that mid-level bankers are going to be murdered in the next couple of years. And now you have the story. We're up to like 80 bankers, and a few were killed just in the last couple of months to resume. because I think there's some secrets that might come out, and they had to prevent that, is Wall Street bankers. I mean, Wall Street banks are so ugly. They're not only killing mid-level bankers who know too much about the offshore shell companies and know too much about the mule deliveries to hidden contacts like for the Vatican and Basel, Switzerland. They know too much about a lot of different things. They know too much about other murders, so they have to be murdered. Here's the ugliest thing about the banker murders. The Wall Street banks have a little contract that they have trading among the other banks. It's for life insurance policies on what they consider key important members of their banks. But they're really not vice presidents. They're not board members. So why aren't they included? Because they're not targeted for kill. They're killing the mid-level ones, putting a life insurance policy on them that's openly traded among Wall Street banks that rises in value, and then after that rises in value, they kill them and collect on the rise in value. Woo! This is hired murder with floating contracts that are bid up. That's Wall Street for you. Criminal organization. Giant criminal organization. I'll actually tell you from my experience in watching things and hearing things and talking to various people, including some sources, I think the U.S. government is the embodiment of at least 5 and maybe as many as 8 or 10, pardon me, I'm losing my voice, 5 at least and maybe 8 or 10 individual government-protected private criminal organizations where they do what they want, they rob what they want, they keep what they want. It doesn't go into the U.S. government treasury. It goes into private accounts of the people running things. I don't want to go into that anymore, but we got a very deteriorated U.S. government system.
Jim, it's even worse than that. They are so independent now, they don't even need the feds for revenue. They can operate this whole Syrian war just based on their drug profits or their Wall Street fraud or whatever. So
I'm aware.
It's pretty grim when you can have a whatever it is now, a 7-year war involving 500,000 troops and everything like that, and you don't even need to get the money from the proper authorities. It's totally out of control. But Jim, we've been on quite a while now, and why don't we call it a day? And as we wrap it up, do you want to mention your website again?
Well, before I do, I just want to confirm that this point. In 2013, my government contact, who I give the name of Cato, told me, he said, Jim, in the next 2 years, you're going to see a very strange phenomenon take place. It's going to cause a lot of problems, but I want you to be in the front of this. It's going to be the Pentagon regulars going to war against the Langley mercenaries who are paid by narcotics money from the Bush-Clinton crime family. And you have it in Syria, and you have AP and UPI press reports talking about the difficulties and risks of Pentagon military taxpayer-funded people going against mercenaries who are being funded by Langley, and they leave out the word narcotics. Okay. My website is called www.goldenjackass.com. I invite people to go there, look at the free material. There are a lot of radio interviews like this. I try to do shows, and I go back to shows that provide links so my clients and followers. I'd love to know how many followers there are that aren't clients and what the ratio is. It might be a little scary, but anyway, I'd like to know. There's no way of estimating it, but I invite people to go look at the free material and then sign up for the newsletter. It's called the Hat Trick Letter. There's a Global Money War Report. There's the Golden Currency Report. They're a lot of work. I just put out the reports last Thursday, so 1 week ago. I'm not exactly kicking back, but that's what I say to my friends. When I kick back, I'm continuing to do the research, continuing to talk to my contacts and some clients, continuing to answer a lot of client questions that pile up. I continue to do radio interviews. I continue to write public articles. And I stay busy so that when it comes time to do the reports, I put my nose to the stone. And I have a joke that I got roots coming out my hind parts into my chair. I spend 10 hours a day when I'm doing the actual report. So I work for 90 minutes, take a little break, eat a bar, have a sandwich, come right back in 15 minutes, do another 2 hours, take a pee break. This is difficult work. And there's so many confusing elements to what's going on. This whole issue about fake news, don't want to get into all that, but it's causing some problems because I think the bad guys are starting websites to create very illegitimate alternative news sites to tarnish the image of alternative news. Getting very weird, Paul, and I thank you for having me on. I'm pretty much out of voice, but I could go.
Not out of spirit. So
no.
On that note, thank you, Jim, for coming. We appreciate all your work. And, folks, it's a wrap. Till next time.